Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Friday, which means it's time for a new How to Bass. And today I'm going to show you how to make this sound. Those of you who have been watching my track from scratch, the current track from scratch, you'll pretty much already be familiar with the sound. However, I didn't really explain what I was doing, and most of you probably haven't seen that. So this is going to be a How to Bass. It's the sound. This is actually two different sounds, but it's basically the same version of the sound, only one is a square type and one is a saw type. And I'll explain how you can change between the two. I am only going to give you just the one preset because it's the same sound. And you can change how you want which one to be what yourself. So this sound, as you can see, is very macro happy. It's all about using the new envelope controller's XY mode. The knob, as we're moving it around up top here, moves around the X knob, which is moving around 8 different articulators with different movement and stuff happening within. It's controlling a number of things. It's also controlling the XY mod inside Citrus, which is itself doing a bunch of different things. I believe it's really only doing one thing. It could be doing a bunch of different things. Appears to just be doing the one. Unless... Nope. Yeah, alright. I believe I initially decided that I wanted to try doing something, that I decided against it. So, this starts out as a Citrus sound. It also starts out just being an FM oscillator of operator 2 going to operator 1. Turn down a bit. That's what that sounds like by just the way it is now. And the way this worked is that it's almost a sawtooth kind of thing. You can see that it's kind of angling up there. And then I have a bunch of different added harmonics. The thing about the harmonic thing is that it's adding another, essentially that note of the waveform. So when it's in sine wave mode, you're adding in new sine waves. But if you're in, say, triangle wave mode, it's adding in new triangle waves, which is actually adding quite a bit more in terms of harmonic content. Because if you remember, a triangle wave in its own harmonic content and as individual sine waves looks like this. So if we were to do a triangle wave with it at a harmonic like this, the real harmonic content is more like something like that, which can be interesting to work with. Which is why, this waveform looks as crazy as it does. As far as what actual harmonics and what phases and whatever, I wasn't paying attention to what it was doing. I was kind of listening to it as it was doing what it was doing just to see, just for stuff that it kind of sounded like. I did kind of want it to be a bit of a wash, though. Instead of a sharp-sounding thing, I wanted it to be this sort of smoother, phasey kind of sound. And the reason for that is because the next step is to ring modulate it with this shape. This shape is the half and even engaged, and then a couple of the modifiers appear changed, like the tension and the skew, to force it, and then the phase was changed based on this setting here in the oscillator tab. And then this is modulating operator 2. Now, operator 2 is FMing operator 1. And remember, in order to change the intensity of FM, you change the volume of the modulating operator. So when we're ring modulating something, ring modulation is the same thing as FM, only it's for volume. So if we're changing the volume of the modulating operator really fast, we're changing the amount of FM that's being applied to operator 1 really fast. And it causes that kind of sharpness. In the effects tab here, this is basically just a chorus. I don't think I actually changed anything in here. I just turned it up a bit. And this is to give a little bit of stereo behavior, which it seems pretty subtle, and as it not like it's doing a lot right now. And that's primarily because it's accentuated by the distortion and all the stuff that we're about to do to it. The X control controls the amount of FM going into operator 1. Which again, feels pretty subtle, but it does have a kind of a large effect on the sound once we sort of apply everything else to it. Now, when I made the sound, I didn't actually apply the macro stuff until pretty late in the game. Next step is this EQ, but this EQ is the only thing this EQ is doing is it has these 2 points, which are actually being controlled by the macro. And this is one of the beautiful things that the macro can do, is that you can set have two different articulators controlling these two different parameters, and they're both doing different things, but in tandem they're creating this particular movement, which you could have done just fine with separate automation clips, or even linking the same automation clip to a link controller link, and then use the equation thing to try and get it to be doing this, and you probably could. It's just really hard. And this business with the XY control here is just a lot easier. The way that you get this to work, I actually made a video about this, but I was explaining it anyway, is that the envelope controller's primary purpose, because it did exist in FL11, this is not as a whole a new thing, it's just that this XY business inside is a new thing. But the XY is a particular, the envelope controller thing is basically like an external articulator ripped right out of Harmor. Because the way that Harmor worked is that you would have, where even is Harmor? There it is. You would have a parameter, and then you go to its articulator, and then you have the parameter linked here, and then you have this business. You have envelope, LFO, keyboard mapping, velocity mapping, mod X, Y, and Z, random, and a bunch of other stuff. And this is all triggered every time, and then it applies itself to whatever parameter you want it to. And this is pretty much like an external version of that you can then link to other things. So you have a whole bunch of different articulators. Each articulator has envelope, LFO, keyboard mapping, velocity mapping, all these things. And it doesn't particularly matter that the envelope is engaged. It doesn't need to be engaged, because its point is also that it's supposed to be triggered with MIDI, so that you use it and it's triggered, and then it runs the envelope, and you apply it to a sound, and that's just how it works. But I'm not using any of that. I'm using specifically just the XY. Now, for the envelope controller, while there are 8 articulators, there are still only 1 X and Y, and then every mod X mapping that we do is being applied to the X knob. So every single articulator that as we're moving it is all moving on the one knob all at once. Indeed. And these are all different things that we'll discuss in a second. Now, like I said before, the envelope controller is designed to be triggered with MIDI, and right now it's not being triggered at all. So this means that we have to click on this little arrow here and enable continuous output. Otherwise, it would only be active when a note is hit. Which I guess would be fine, since there's only actually sound when a note is hit, but it's just a lot easier to not have to worry about that. I didn't change anything else about this. I'm just using the mod X and Y, the individual articulators, and then I've made the mapping its own thing. And you might say I'm using all the articulators. You might be thinking, well, there's only 8 of them. What if I run out? Well, you could also use the Y mapping. So if you wanted to use you can use 2 different things, have a different motion, and then you have 8 entire other articulators for what might as well be a second X mod. And then if you run out of that, you could just clone it and do it again, and it will just keep going. So like you don't really need to have a billion articulators in one thing, because you can manage that. So 2 of the articulators are inside this EQ, which are controlling this guy's motion, which I appear to have screwed up. Did I disable continuous output? You want to work? Why don't you work? No. Now you work. Weird. I guess I had to hit play to jigger it out of there. Anyway, so this guy was those 2 articulators. 2 articulators, 1 articulator per parameter. You can link more than one parameter to an articulator, but if you want to have different motion, it needs to be 2 different articulators. The first articulator is linked to this distortion, which I believe I'm doing the mix on that. Nope, just pregame. So I've experimented with manipulating the pregame before, and really what that just is doing is changing how much of the shape this inside the wave shaper is being applied to the waveform, and thus changing its shape, which really just means how intense is the distortion being applied to it. So this means that at lower values, the sound itself is not as distorted, but at higher values, it gets more distorted. Kind of cool. 2 more articulators are being played into the vocodex. Now, vocodex, I'm using it as its own. The sound is its own carrier and modulator, and I'm controlling the pitch, I think, and the bandwidth. Yep. I've been thinking, well, what's the point of that? The bandwidth definitely controls a particular amount of. So between those 2 parameters, it's really very clear how well it controls it. Of course, now that there you go. The beautiful thing about a macro is that we're changing a lot of things that in the past I would have just automated myself, and they would have been different, and they would have always been different. Because I'm a big fan of just, putting points down and letting it do its thing. But the beautiful point about the macro is that every modulation is always going to be the same. So I can... and it works out just fine. Not much else is happening in here. I went into the band distribution. I brought the line all the way down. By default, it's up here somewhere. And what this is doing is it makes it so that it's vocoding all the bass frequencies as well. Although that's not really necessary because I am also linking, I'm letting the carrier mix come in here, and also the bit of the modulator mix come in as well. So the higher and the lower frequencies are coming in, and the mids are being dominated entirely by what the actual vocoder is doing. As well, in the song that I'm using this in, I high-passed it to add in a separate sub. So really, that's like kind of up to you. I'm also using a very low band count. And I've discovered that if you do that, it removes a lot of sort of the vocody artifact that happens when you have, a lot. It gets kind of watery and weird, and if you want it to be more solid, the lower band count tends to help. So that's pretty important. Also, I want to point out in the vocodecs, the ring modulation thing that I'm using, I have a slightly different pitch from the other two guys, which are all the same pitch. And what that is doing is that it means that we're getting a little bit of motion in what the ring modulator is doing. And because it's a different pitch, essentially what this means is that over time it's slowly moving as I'm playing it. And that's really what this is a kind of a window in a particular position inside the wave shape and the wave oscillation. And it's like kind of opening up in that window and moving it around. And so it gives it a little bit of an extra kind of push versus if it were just static. So it's a little bit of added like movement in there, which is mostly procedural. And then we have this guy, which is actually my typical Bandpass notch configuration that I usually use on my neuro stuff, and they're all controlled by an individual macros. As for what positions and what I actually chose inside the articulators to make it do what I wanted to do, to like move and then make the sound that I wanted, I did mostly just kind of put lines down and move it while I was playing it to get the positions that I wanted, and that's just really all there was to it. I didn't really plan out a lot about what that sound was going to do. Just to get that back in there. And then it's all going through a Maximus, which, like most things that I do with my Bandpass notch stuff, is here to bring back the frequencies and to kind of bring it all up. Especially the higher frequencies, which you could see there were not a lot of in the original uncompressed state, so I need to kind of bring them up there just so that they're pretty balanced. After that, that's just it. There's not really any they're in the song version of this, because right now this is what this sounds like, just this. I removed all the post-processing and all the master compression that I had in the song, and this is what it sounds like completely by itself. So there's no EQing, there's none of that going on. But in the song that I'm using it in, I'd have a little bit of that going on. In case you were wondering why it sounds just slightly different. The difference is not so big. So now, I mentioned earlier that I have two versions of this. One that's this saw type kind of thing, and then one that's a square type kind of thing. And how do we get that? Well, this happens inside Citrus. Right now, I'm FMing the sound by a sound that's the same pitch, and I'm also ring modulating it by the sound that's the same pitch. And you may have seen this before in previous how to basses, but as it turns out, this kind of stuff will net you harmonics that are pretty close. They're like they are the saw wave series, the Fourier series. But if you want to have the square series, which is every other harmonic, half as many of the harmonics and spaced out a bit more than the saw waves, you need to FM it by an octave higher. Which you might be thinking right now, that didn't do anything, and that's because the tone that we're getting right now is almost entirely the result of the ring modulator. So this as well needs to be an octave higher, which is essentially saying that this is now happening twice as fast per oscillation. So it's as if there's two of these now inside each individual waveform. And then now we have the square mode. Square mode. Saw mode. Square mode. Saw mode. That's all there is to it. That's the only difference between the two of them that I have currently here. So yeah, that's this sound, and this was done with a little bit. This is actually this is using pretty regular things in terms of like processes and ideas and controls for things. The big difference and the big change in usability for a sound like this is that I'm using all this macro business to control everything, and I'm only automating a single parameter inside the song as opposed to all of them. This would have been 8 automation clips, 8, 9. This would have been 9 automation clips otherwise. So that's a huge deal. Which I guess has been something that you could be doing in other DAWs for kind of a long time. So yay, FL. But yeah, I'll give you this patch. This guy here, this patcher, as a download. And if you have any questions about this, let me know. And please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And then if you have any questions, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.